The clock on the wall showed 9:47 p.m. when Daniel stepped out of his private office on the 42nd floor. The building was quiet now, nothing like the buzzing energy it had during the day when hundreds of employees filled these hallways. He liked these late hours. No meetings, no phone calls, just him and his work. Daniel had built Vision Tech from nothing. 15 years ago, it was just him and his best friend David working out of a cramped garage, surviving on instant noodles and big dreams. Now his company was worth over $3 billion. They'd created software that helped other companies protect their data, and ironically, that's what made them rich. Trust and security. That's what his whole business was built on. He rubbed his tired eyes and decided to grab a coffee from the break room. The executive floor was empty, or so he thought. As he walked down the corridor, he heard the soft sound of a vacuum cleaner coming from one of the conference rooms. The cleaning crew. He'd seen them around but never really paid attention. They came after everyone left, did their job, and disappeared before morning. When Daniel reached the break room, he found a young woman wiping down the counters. She looked up, startled to see him. Her name tag read Keisha. She was probably in her mid-20s with her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She quickly looked down, clearly uncomfortable. "Sorry, Mr. Chen. I mean, Mr. Thompson," she stammered, mixing up his name in her nervousness. "I'll finish up and get out of your way." No, it's fine," Daniel said, offering a friendly smile. "I'm just getting coffee. Don't mind me." He grabbed a mug from the cabinet and started making his coffee. The silence felt awkward. He could sense the woman was anxious, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. He'd never been good at small talk, but he tried anyway. "Working late too, huh?" he said. "Yes, sir. We cleaned this floor last because everyone's usually gone by now." Daniel nodded, stirring his coffee. He was about to leave when he noticed she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. It wasn't just nervousness anymore. It was something else. Concern? Fear? "Sir," she said quietly, then stopped herself. "Yes?" Daniel turned back to face her. She glanced toward the doorway as if checking whether anyone else was around. Her hands gripped the cleaning cloth tighter. Can I talk to you about something?" Daniel felt a flutter of concern. Was she going to complain about her working conditions? Report harassment from someone? He hoped it wasn't something serious, but the look on her face suggested it was. "Of course," he said, trying to sound approachable. "What's on your mind?" Keisha took a deep breath. She seemed to be debating whether to speak at all. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "There's a camera in your office." Daniel blinked. "A camera? You mean the security cameras?" "Yes, the building has—" "No, sir," she interrupted, shaking her head firmly. "Not those cameras. A hidden one. In your office. Behind the air vent above your desk." For a moment, Daniel just stared at her. His brain was trying to process what she just said. A hidden camera? In his private office? That didn't make any sense. "I'm sorry, I don't understand," he said slowly. "Are you sure about this?" Keisha nodded, her eyes wide and serious. "Last Tuesday night around this time, I was cleaning the executive offices. I saw someone in your office. At first I thought it was you working late, so I didn't go in. But then I realized it wasn't you. It was a man I'd never seen before." Daniel's heart rate picked up slightly. "What was he doing?" "He had a ladder," she continued, speaking faster now, as if relieved to finally share this burden. "He was standing on it, working on something near the ceiling. I watched through the glass door for a minute because I wasn't sure if I should interrupt him. That's when I saw him place something small behind the vent, something black with a tiny red light." "Why didn't you say something earlier?" Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice calm even though his mind was racing. Keisha looked down at her hands. "I almost did. But then I thought, who would believe me? I'm just the cleaning lady, and I wasn't completely sure what I saw. Maybe it was legitimate maintenance work. I didn't want to cause trouble or lose my job over a mistake." Daniel understood her hesitation. He felt a pang of guilt thinking about how invisible the cleaning staff must feel in this building. They saw everything but were rarely seen themselves. "What made you decide to tell me now?" he asked gently. "I've been thinking about it all week," she admitted. "I couldn't sleep properly. I kept wondering, what if it's something bad? What if someone's spying on you? I clean your office every night. I see the papers on your desk, the contracts, the important documents. If someone's watching—" She trailed off, her concern evident. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. His office was where he conducted his most sensitive business. Merger discussions, acquisition plans, proprietary technology demonstrations, confidential client meetings. If someone really had planted a hidden camera in there, the implications were staggering. But who would do such a thing? And why? Can you describe this man? Daniel asked, pulling out his phone to take notes. Keisha closed her eyes, trying to remember. He was white, maybe in his 30s. Tall, over 6 feet. Brown hair, wore glasses. He had on jeans and a dark jacket. Oh, and he had a backpack with him. The technical kind that computer people carry. Daniel's stomach tightened. That description could fit dozens of people who worked in his building. But something about it nagged at him. Did you see which way he went after he left my office? He went toward the elevator. I hid in the supply closet because I didn't want him to know I'd seen him. I heard the elevator ding and then everything was quiet again. Daniel ran his hand through his hair, trying to think clearly. Part of him wanted to dismiss this as a misunderstanding. Maybe it really was maintenance work. Maybe the building security team had installed additional monitoring for some reason. But another part of him, the part that had built a successful company on instinct and smart decisions, was screaming that something was very wrong. Keisha, he said seriously, looking her directly in the eyes. I want you to know that I'm grateful you told me this. You did the right thing. I'm going to look into it. Relief washed over her face. Really, you believe me? I believe something happened that concerned you enough to risk telling me about it, Daniel said. That's enough for me to investigate. And I promise you, whether this turns out to be something or nothing, you won't face any consequences for speaking up. Thank you, sir, she said, her voice shaky with emotion. I was so worried you'd think I was making it up or causing drama. Daniel shook his head. Not at all. Can I ask you something else? Have you noticed anything else unusual? Anyone else acting strangely around the executive offices? Keisha thought for a moment. Nothing specific. But now that I think about it, there have been a few nights over the past few months when I've heard voices in the offices when they should be empty. I always assumed it was employees working late, but I never actually saw anyone. This was getting more disturbing by the minute. Daniel's company dealt with highly valuable intellectual property. Their security software was cutting edge, worth millions to competitors who would love to steal their innovations. Corporate espionage wasn't just something that happened in movies. It was real and it was expensive. If you remember anything else, anything at all, I want you to tell me immediately, Daniel said, handing her his business card. This has my direct cell phone number. Call me anytime, day or night. Keisha took the card with trembling hands, staring at it as if it were made of gold. Your personal number, really? Really, Daniel confirmed. And Keisha? Please don't mention this conversation to anyone else. Not your colleagues, not your supervisor. No one. Can you do that? She nodded solemnly. Yes, sir. I won't say a word. After she left, Daniel stood alone in the break room, his coffee forgotten and growing cold. His mind was spinning with possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. He wanted to run to his office right now and tear that vent apart to see if Keisha was right. But he forced himself to slow down and think strategically. If there really was a hidden camera, whoever placed it there would be monitoring it. They might be watching right now. If Daniel suddenly discovered and removed the camera, they'd know they'd been caught and they'd have time to cover their tracks. He needed to be smart about this. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found what he was looking for. Mitchell Security Solutions. They were a private firm that specialized in corporate counter-surveillance. Daniel had met their CEO at a conference 2 years ago. They'd stayed in touch, occasionally grabbing lunch when they were both in the city. It was late, but Daniel sent a text anyway. Need your team's services urgently. Potential security breach. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning, early before staff arrives? The response came back within 2 minutes. I'll be there at 6 a.m. bringing my best tech. Daniel exhaled slowly. Tomorrow morning he'd have answers. But tonight he had to act normal. He had to go back to his office, work for another hour like nothing was wrong, and trust that Keisha's warning was the truth. As he walked back toward his office, Daniel's eyes drifted to the air vent above his desk. From here it looked completely innocent. Just a standard ventilation grate like thousands of others in the building. But if Keisha was right, behind that ordinary-looking grate was a device watching his every move, recording his every word. He sat down at his desk and opened his laptop, pretending to review emails. But his mind was elsewhere. He thought about the past few months. Had there been signs? Strange coincidences? He'd been puzzled when a competitor had released a product eerily similar to one Vision Tech was developing. He'd chalked it up to parallel innovation. Then there was the merger deal that had fallen through mysteriously after weeks of positive negotiations. The other company had suddenly gotten cold feet, as if they'd learned something that made them back out. At the time, he'd been frustrated, but moved on. Business was unpredictable. But now, with the possibility of a hidden camera, those incidents took on a sinister new meaning. Daniel forced himself to work for another 45 minutes, typing reports and responding to emails, all while acutely aware of the vent above him. Finally, he shut down his computer, grabbed his jacket and left the office, making sure to lock the door behind him. As he rode the elevator down to the parking garage, Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from David, his business partner and oldest friend. "Hey, saw you were working late again. Everything okay?" Daniel stared at the message. David always seemed to know when he was in the office, even at odd hours. They'd joked about it before, calling it their business partner telepathy. But now, Daniel felt a creeping sense of suspicion that he immediately tried to push away. No, not David. They'd built this company together. They'd struggled through the early years when they couldn't make payroll. They'd celebrated every victory together. David was family. But a small voice in the back of Daniel's mind whispered, "Then who?" He typed back a simple response, "All good. Just catching up on work. See you tomorrow." As Daniel drove home through the quiet city streets, he couldn't shake the image of Keisha's worried face. She'd risked so much by telling him what she'd seen. In her position, keeping quiet would have been easier and safer. But she'd chosen to speak up anyway. Tomorrow morning, he'd know the truth. And if there really was a camera in his office, Daniel would find out who put it there and why. Someone had violated his trust, invaded his privacy, and potentially stolen his company's secrets, and whoever it was, they were about to discover that Daniel Thompson hadn't built a $3 billion company by being naive or forgiving. Daniel barely slept that night. He kept replaying his conversation with Keisha in his mind, analyzing every detail she'd shared. By 4 a.m, he gave up on sleep entirely and headed to the office. The city was still dark, with only a few early commuters and delivery trucks on the roads. He arrived at the building at 5:30. The lobby security guard looked surprised to see him so early, but buzzed him through with a friendly nod. Daniel took the elevator to the 42nd floor, his heart pounding harder with each passing floor. The empty office felt different now. Every shadow seemed suspicious. Every sound made him flinch. He unlocked his office door and stepped inside, immediately looking up at the vent above his desk. It looked exactly as it always had. Perfectly ordinary. He resisted the urge to climb up and check it himself. That's what the professionals were for. At exactly 6 o'clock, his phone buzzed. The lobby guard informed him that Raymond Mitchell had arrived. Daniel went down to meet him personally, not wanting to discuss anything over the phone or through building security. Raymond was a former FBI agent who'd started his own security consulting firm after retiring. He was in his 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. He'd brought 2 technicians with him, both carrying large equipment cases. "Daniel," Raymond said, shaking his hand firmly. "Your text sounded urgent. What's going on?" Daniel led them to a conference room far from his office and closed the door. He explained everything. Keisha's warning, the description of the man with the ladder, the timing of it all. Raymond listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "You did the right thing calling us," Raymond said when Daniel finished. "If there's a camera where she says there is, we'll find it. And we'll be able to tell you exactly what kind of device it is, how long it's been there, and where it's transmitting to." "How long will it take?" Daniel asked. "Depends on what we find. Could be an hour, could be several. We'll start with your office, but if there's one camera, there might be others. We should sweep the entire executive floor to be safe." Daniel nodded, his mouth dry. "Whatever you need to do." The next 2 hours were excruciating. Daniel sat in the conference room trying to work on his laptop, but mostly just staring at the screen. He jumped every time his phone buzzed. Employees started arriving for work around 8, and Daniel had to act like everything was normal. He sent out a quick email saying he was in meetings all morning and shouldn't be disturbed. At 8:43 a.m., Raymond walked into the conference room. His face was grim. We found it, he said quietly, closing the door behind him. Exactly where your employee said it would be. Daniel felt his stomach drop. Part of him had been hoping Keisha was mistaken, that there was some innocent explanation. But no, someone really had been watching him. Show me, Daniel said, standing up. They walked to his office where Raymond's team had set up their equipment. One of the technicians, a young woman named Lisa, held up a small device no bigger than a USB drive. It had a tiny lens on one end and looked incredibly sophisticated. This is high-end equipment, Lisa explained. Not something you can buy at a regular electronics store. It's wireless, transmits in real time to a remote server, has night vision capability, and the battery life is around 6 months. Whoever planted this knew what they were doing. Can you trace where it's sending the footage? Daniel asked. We're working on that now, Raymond said. The signal is encrypted, but we're good at what we do. Give us a few hours. Daniel looked at the vent where the camera had been hidden. Was there just one? Raymond shook his head slowly. We found 3 more. One in the main conference room, one in David Richardson's office, and one in the break room. The mention of David's name made Daniel's blood run cold. In David's office, too? Yes, same type of device, same setup. Whoever did this wanted to monitor both of you. Daniel sat down heavily in his chair. This wasn't just about him. Someone was spying on the entire executive leadership. But why? And who had access to plant cameras in multiple secured locations? There's something else, Lisa said, looking at her laptop screen. Based on the dust patterns and the installation method, we estimate these cameras have been in place for at least 3 to 4 months. 3 to 4 months. Daniel thought back to that timeline. The failed merger, the competitor's suspiciously similar product launch, a major client who'd suddenly switched to a rival company. It all happened within that window. How much would something like this cost? Daniel asked. The cameras alone? About $2,000 each, Raymond said. But the real expense is the encryption software, the remote server setup, and the expertise to install them without being detected. We're talking about a $20,000 to $30,000 operation. This wasn't some amateur job. Daniel's mind raced. Who would spend that kind of money to spy on him? And more importantly, who had the access and opportunity to plant the cameras? We need to review building security footage, Daniel said suddenly. Keisha saw someone last Tuesday, but if these cameras have been here for months, whoever installed them would have been caught on the building's cameras multiple times. Raymond nodded approvingly. Good thinking. You have access to that footage? I'll get it, Daniel said, already pulling out his phone. Within an hour, they were in the building's security office, reviewing footage with the head of security, Tom Bradley. Tom was a retired police officer who'd worked for Vision Tech for 5 years. He looked genuinely shocked when Daniel explained what they'd found. I can't believe this happened under my watch, Tom said, shaking his head. We have cameras everywhere. How did we miss this? They started with the footage from last Tuesday night, the night Keisha had witnessed someone in Daniel's office. At 9:15 p.m., they saw a man entering the executive floor. He used a security badge to get through the locked door. The timestamp showed him entering Daniel's office at 9:18 p.m. Pause it there, Daniel said, his heart racing. Can you zoom in on his face? Tom enhanced the image. The man was exactly as Keisha had described. Tall, brown hair, glasses, carrying a technical backpack. But there was something else, something that made Daniel's chest tighten with disbelief. I know him, Daniel whispered. Raymond looked at him sharply. Who is he? His name is Trevor Richardson. He works in our IT department. Daniel paused, the full weight of realization hitting him. He's David's cousin. The room fell silent. Everyone understood the implications immediately. That doesn't necessarily mean David is involved, Raymond said carefully. The cousin could be acting independently. But Daniel was already thinking back to everything he knew about Trevor. David had asked him personally to hire Trevor 3 years ago. Said the kid was brilliant with computers, studying cybersecurity, needed a break. Daniel had trusted David's judgment and brought Trevor on board without a formal interview process. He'd given him access to their systems, their networks, their security protocols. Pull up more footage, Daniel said quietly. Go back 3 months. I want to see every time Trevor accessed the executive floor after hours. They spent the next 2 hours reviewing footage. The pattern was clear and damning. Trevor had accessed the executive floor late at night on 17 different occasions over the past 4 months. Each time he went directly to an executive office, stayed for 10 to 20 minutes, and left. On several occasions, he was carrying a ladder from the maintenance closet. He was installing and maintaining the cameras, Lisa said, pointing at her notes. These devices need occasional battery swaps and position adjustments. He was coming back regularly to service them. Daniel felt sick. This wasn't just corporate espionage. This was betrayal by someone he'd trusted, someone in his own company, someone connected to his best friend. We need to trace where the camera feed is going, Daniel said firmly. That's the only way we'll know who's behind this. Raymond's team worked through lunch using sophisticated equipment to intercept and trace the wireless signals. Finally, around 2 in the afternoon, Lisa called them over to her laptop. Got it, she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The feed is going to an encrypted server, but I managed to trace the payment information for that server. It was purchased using a credit card belonging to a company called Cascade Solutions, LLC. Never heard of it, Daniel said. Look up the company registration. Tom pulled up the business registry on his computer. Cascade Solutions, LLC registered in Delaware 8 months ago. Owner and sole operator listed as Trevor Richardson. There it was, proof that Trevor was running this operation. But the question remained. Was he working alone or was someone else pulling the strings? We need to look at his company's financials, Daniel said. Follow the money. Raymond made a call to a contact who specialized in financial investigations. Within an hour, they had preliminary information about Cascade Solutions. The company had received 3 large payments in the past 6 months, totaling over $400,000. The payments came from various corporate accounts, but with some digging, they tracked them back to shell companies and offshore accounts. Then they found something interesting. One of the shell companies had a connection to NextCore Technologies, one of VisionTech's biggest competitors. They're paying Trevor to spy on us, Daniel said, anger rising in his voice. He's selling our company's secrets to competitors. But Raymond was frowning at the screen. There's something else here. Look at this transfer. He pointed to a transaction from 2 months ago. $50,000 moved from Cascade Solutions to a personal account. That account belongs to David Richardson. Daniel felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. He sat down, unable to process what he was seeing. David, his best friend, his partner, the person he'd trusted with everything. It could be a loan, Tom suggested weakly. Maybe Trevor borrowed money from his cousin. But Daniel knew better. The timing, the amount, the way it was structured through the shell company. This wasn't a loan. This was a payment. A cut of the profits from selling VisionTech's secrets. I need to see more, Daniel said, his voice hollow. Show me everything. Over the next hour, the financial picture became clearer and more devastating. David had received multiple payments from Trevor's company over the past 6 months, totaling nearly $200,000. But that wasn't all. They discovered that David had been having secret meetings with executives from NextCore Technologies. Calendar invites disguised as personal appointments that lined up with lunches and dinners at expensive restaurants. Raymond pulled up phone records. David and Trevor had been in regular contact, including several calls late at night right before or after Trevor accessed the executive floor. The evidence was overwhelming. David wasn't just aware of the surveillance. He was orchestrating it. He'd brought his cousin into the company specifically for this purpose. He'd been selling VisionTech's secrets for months, maybe longer. Daniel sat in silence, staring at the computer screens full of evidence. His mind kept going back to memories. Starting the company together in that garage, celebrating their first major contract, the late nights planning their future, the promises they'd made to always have each other's backs, 15 years of friendship and partnership. All of it a lie. What do you want to do? Raymond asked gently. Daniel looked up, and Raymond saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Steel. Determination. Anger, controlled by cold calculation. I want to know everything, Daniel said. Every secret he sold, every meeting he took, every dollar he made. I want to know exactly how deep this betrayal goes before I confront him. That could take days, Raymond warned. Then we have days, Daniel replied. David doesn't know we found the cameras. Trevor doesn't know we're onto him. We have the advantage right now and I'm not wasting it. We do this right. We gather every piece of evidence. We document everything. And then, Daniel paused, his jaw tight. Then we make sure they both pay for what they've done. Raymond nodded slowly. I'll have my team work around the clock. As the others filed out of the security office to continue their investigation, Daniel sat alone for a moment. He pulled out his phone and looked at his text messages with David. Years of conversations, plans and dreams and jokes between friends. His finger hovered over the delete button, but he stopped himself. Evidence. It was all evidence now. His phone buzzed with a new message from David. Lunch tomorrow. Haven't caught up in a while. Daniel stared at the message. Just yesterday he would have said yes immediately. Now every word felt like a lie. Every friendly gesture felt like manipulation. He typed back, "Sure, the usual place." "Perfect. See you at noon." Daniel set down his phone and looked out the window at the city below. Somewhere out there, David was going about his day, thinking he'd gotten away with it, thinking his cameras were still streaming footage, thinking Daniel was still his trusting friend and partner. But everything had changed. The cameras were gone. The investigation was underway. And tomorrow at lunch, Daniel would sit across from his oldest friend, smile and act like nothing was wrong, because the time for confrontation would come. But not yet. Not until Daniel knew everything. Not until he had every piece of evidence locked down tight. Keisha had trusted him with the truth. Now it was time for Daniel to uncover all of it, no matter how painful. The hunt was on. Daniel barely touched his breakfast the next morning. His wife Jennifer noticed but didn't push. She knew when her husband was dealing with something big at work. What she didn't know was that in a few hours he'd be sitting across from his best friend, pretending everything was normal while knowing the truth about his betrayal. "You okay?" Jennifer asked, pouring him more coffee. "Just a complicated deal I'm working through," Daniel said, which wasn't entirely a lie. He hated keeping things from her. But Raymond had advised him to keep the investigation completely confidential. The fewer people who knew, the better. Jennifer kissed his forehead. "You'll figure it out. You always do. If only it were that simple." At 11:30, Daniel arrived at Marcello's, the Italian restaurant where he and David had been having lunch for years. The owner, Vincent, greeted him like family and led him to their usual table by the window. Daniel ordered water and waited, his heart beating faster than he'd like to admit. David walked in at exactly noon, his usual confident smile in place. He wore an expensive suit, designer watch glinting on his wrist. Daniel had never really thought about where David got the money for his lifestyle. They both made good salaries as co-founders, but David always seemed to have a little more. A nicer car, more expensive vacations. Daniel had assumed David was just better at managing money. Now he knew the truth. David had been funding his lifestyle by selling their company's secrets. "Hey, brother," David said, using the term they'd called each other for years. He clapped Daniel on the shoulder and sat down. "Good to see you. Feels like we barely talk anymore except at board meetings." "Yeah, we've both been busy," Daniel said, keeping his voice casual. "How's everything going on your end?" "Can't complain," David said, scanning the menu, even though they both always ordered the same thing. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something. I've been thinking about maybe taking some time off. A real vacation, not just a long weekend. Maybe a month in Europe. A month in Europe." Daniel wondered if David was planning to run. Did he sense something was wrong? Or was this just coincidence? "That sounds great," Daniel said carefully. "When were you thinking?" "Maybe in a couple of months. I just need to wrap up a few projects first." David looked up from his menu. "You should come too. Bring Jennifer. When's the last time we took a trip together? Just the four of us, like old times." Old times. Before the betrayal. Before the lies. Daniel felt anger rising in his chest but pushed it down. He had to stay calm. Stay focused. "I'll think about it," Daniel said. Jennifer would love that. They ordered their food, and for the next 20 minutes they talked like they always had. Business strategy, industry news, a funny story about a difficult client. David was completely relaxed, laughing and joking. He had no idea that Daniel knew everything. Daniel studied his friend's face, looking for signs of guilt or stress. But there was nothing. David was either an incredible actor, or he'd become so comfortable with his deception that it didn't bother him anymore. Daniel wasn't sure which was worse. "So," David said, leaning back in his chair, "what's new with you? You seemed distracted this morning in your email." Daniel's stomach tightened. He hadn't sent David any emails that morning. "What email?" "The one about the quarterly reports," David said, frowning slightly. "You said you needed to review them again before the board meeting." Daniel hadn't sent any such email. which meant David was lying, testing him, or genuinely confused. Daniel decided to play along. Oh, right. Yeah, I just want to make sure all the numbers are solid. David nodded, but something in his expression had shifted. Just for a second, Daniel saw a flicker of something. Suspicion, concern. It was gone too quickly to tell. They finished lunch and said goodbye outside the restaurant. Daniel watched David walk away, pulling out his phone immediately. As soon as David turned the corner, Daniel called Raymond. "We need to move faster," Daniel said quietly. "I think he might suspect something." "We're almost done," Raymond assured him. "My team has been working nonstop. We've traced every transaction, every meeting, every secret that was sold. We'll have a complete report by tomorrow morning." "That's not fast enough," Daniel said, frustration creeping into his voice. "I need leverage now. I need something so solid that he can't talk his way out of it." Raymond was quiet for a moment. "There might be a way to force his hand. Are you willing to take a risk?" "What kind of risk?" "Set a trap. Feed false information through your office. Something big enough that he can't resist selling it. When that information shows up with competitors or in the press, we'll have proof that the leak is still active. It'll also tell us exactly who he's working with." Daniel thought about it. It was risky. If David had removed his own cameras or changed his methods, the trap wouldn't work. But if the surveillance was still ongoing through other means, this could be the final piece of evidence they needed. "What do you suggest?" Daniel asked. "Create a fake acquisition plan. Make it believable. Discuss it in your office with specific details and numbers. If David's still monitoring you somehow, he'll pass that information along. We'll be watching to see where it surfaces." Daniel made a decision. "Let's do it. I'll set it up for this afternoon." Back at the office, Daniel gathered 3 of his most trusted executives: Helen from finance, Robert from legal, and Patricia from operations. He brought them into his office and closed the door. "What I'm about to tell you stays in this room," Daniel said seriously. "I'm going to discuss a fictional acquisition with you. None of it is real. This is part of an internal security test, and I need you to play along as if it were genuine." They all looked confused but nodded. Daniel had earned their loyalty over the years, and they trusted him even when he couldn't explain everything. For the next hour, they discussed a fake plan to acquire a smaller competitor called TechFlow Industries for $500 million. Daniel made up specific details: the timeline, the financing structure, the integration plan, even the names of people who would be involved. He wanted it to sound completely legitimate. When the meeting ended and his executives left, Daniel sat alone in his office. If David was still watching somehow, the bait was set. Now they just had to wait. The waiting was torture. Daniel went through the motions of work, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept checking his phone, expecting Raymond to call with news. Hours passed. Nothing. That evening, after most employees had gone home, Daniel called Keisha. He'd been thinking about her all day. Without her courage to speak up, he'd still be oblivious to everything happening around him. "Hello?" Keisha answered, sounding nervous to receive a call from the CEO's personal number. "Keisha, it's Daniel Thompson. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Of course, sir." "Is everything all right?" "Thanks to you, yes. I wanted you to know that we found the cameras exactly where you said they were. You were absolutely right, and your warning might have saved my company." He heard her exhale in relief. "I'm so glad you found them. I've been worried sick thinking about what could have happened if I'd stayed quiet." "You did the brave thing," Daniel said. "Not many people would have spoken up. I want you to know that I won't forget this. When this is all over, we're going to have a serious conversation about your future at this company. You deserve better than the night cleaning shift." "Thank you, sir," Keisha said, her voice emotional. "That means more than you know." After they hung up, Daniel felt a small measure of peace. At least something good would come from this mess. Keisha would get the recognition and opportunity she deserved. His phone rang. It was Raymond. "It worked," Raymond said. "Your fake acquisition plan just appeared on a Financial Insider blog 30 minutes ago. Anonymous source, but it has every detail you discussed in that meeting, word for word in some places." Daniel felt a mix of vindication and fury. How did they get it so fast? "That's what's interesting. We've been monitoring Trevor's activities. He hasn't been back to the office since we removed the cameras, which means David must have another source. Someone else feeding him information from inside your company. A second mole." Daniel hadn't considered that possibility. "Who?" "We're working on it. But here's the thing. This blog post is going to create problems for you. Other companies will see it. Competitors will react. TechFlow's stock price is going to move. You need to get ahead of this. Daniel hadn't thought about the consequences of the trap. A fake acquisition plan becoming public news would raise questions, damage credibility. He'd been so focused on catching David that he hadn't considered the collateral damage. What do I do? Daniel asked. Call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning, Raymond said. Lay out everything we found. Show them the evidence. You need the board on your side before you confront David directly. Daniel agreed. He spent the next hour calling board members, requesting their presence at an 8 a.m. meeting. He marked it as urgent and confidential. Most of them sounded concerned, but they all agreed to attend. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep again. He lay in bed next to Jennifer, staring at the ceiling, running through everything in his mind. Tomorrow, he'd reveal David's betrayal to the board. Tomorrow, 15 years of friendship and partnership would officially end. Tomorrow, everything would change. At 7:30 the next morning, Daniel arrived at the office with Raymond and his team. They set up a presentation in the main boardroom with all the evidence, photos of the cameras, financial records showing Trevor's payments, calendar entries of David's secret meetings with competitors, and the blog post about the fake acquisition. The board members arrived one by one, looking curious and concerned. David walked in last, his usual confident smile faltering when he saw Raymond and his security team. What's all this about? David asked, trying to sound casual but failing. Have a seat, David, Daniel said quietly. Everyone, thank you for coming on short notice. What I'm about to show you is disturbing, but you all need to see it. For the next 30 minutes, Daniel walked the board through everything. The discovery of the cameras, the investigation, the financial trail connecting Trevor to shell companies and competitors, David's secret meetings, the payments he'd received, the fake acquisition plan that had appeared online within hours of being discussed. The room was completely silent except for Daniel's voice. Board members' faces showed shock, anger, and disbelief, but no one looked more shocked than David. This is insane, David said, standing up. Daniel, what are you doing? These accusations are completely false. The evidence speaks for itself, Raymond said calmly, displaying a financial transaction on the screen. This is a payment of $50,000 from your cousin's shell company to your personal account. Can you explain that? David's face flushed red. That was a loan. Trevor needed help with his business. A business that exists solely to sell vision tech secrets to competitors? Daniel said, his voice hard. A business that paid you nearly $200,000 over 6 months? You're twisting everything, David said, but his voice wavered. These could be fabricated. How do I know this is real? Helen, the CFO, spoke up. I've reviewed the financial records personally. They're legitimate. The money trail is clear. David looked around the room, seeing no allies. Every board member was staring at him with varying degrees of anger and disappointment. He turned back to Daniel, and for the first time Daniel saw his mask crack. The confidence was gone. In its place was something desperate. Daniel, David said quietly, can we talk about this privately? Please, just you and me. No, Daniel said firmly. Everything that needs to be said can be said here in front of the board. David was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he sat back down. His shoulders slumped. When he spoke again, his voice was different, smaller, defeated. How did you find out? He asked. The admission hung in the air. Several board members gasped. One shook her head in disgust. Does it matter? Daniel asked. I guess not, David said, staring at his hands. He looked up at Daniel, and there was something in his eyes. Not quite remorse, but maybe regret. You were always going to be the star, Daniel. The brilliant founder. The one everyone admired. I was just the other guy. The partner nobody really remembered. So you decided to betray everything we built? Daniel asked, unable to keep the emotion from his voice. I decided to take what I deserved, David said, some of his defiance returning. This company is as much mine as yours. But you get all the credit. All the magazine covers. All the speaking invitations. I'm tired of being invisible. You weren't invisible, Daniel said. You were my partner, my friend. I trusted you with everything. Trust, David laughed bitterly. Trust doesn't pay for the lifestyle I want. Trust doesn't make me feel valued. The board chair, an older man named Gregory, cleared his throat. David, effective immediately, you are removed from all positions within this company. Your access is revoked. Legal proceedings will begin today. I suggest you hire an attorney. David stood slowly, straightening his tie. He looked at Daniel one last time. I'm not sorry for what I did. I'm only sorry I got caught. Then he walked out of the boardroom, and Daniel watched 15 years of friendship disappear through the door. The silence after David left the boardroom was deafening. Daniel stood there staring at the empty doorway, feeling like he'd just been in a car crash. His hands were shaking, and he gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. Are you all right? Helen asked softly, touching his shoulder. Daniel nodded, though he wasn't sure it was true. We need to secure everything. Change all access codes, passwords, everything David had his hands on. Already working on it, Robert, the head of legal, said, typing rapidly on his phone. I've got our IT team locking him out of all systems right now. He won't be able to access anything. What about Trevor? Patricia asked. Is he still in the building? Raymond stepped forward. We've been monitoring him. He called in sick today. Hasn't left his apartment. We think David warned him something was wrong. We need to move on him now, Gregory said firmly. Before he destroys evidence or runs, Daniel's phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. He showed it to Raymond, who immediately began tracing the number. Within minutes, they confirmed it came from David's personal cell phone. He's threatening you, Raymond said grimly. We should involve the police. Not yet, Daniel said, his mind racing. David's angry and embarrassed, but he's not violent. He's trying to scare me. What I want to know is how deep this really goes. You said there might be another source inside the company. Raymond nodded. The information moved too fast from your meeting to that blog post. Even with the cameras, someone would need time to transcribe, package, and sell that information. But this happened in under 2 hours. Someone was either in that meeting or had immediate access to someone who was. Daniel thought about the 3 executives he'd brought into his fake acquisition discussion. Helen, Robert, and Patricia. He'd trusted them completely. Could one of them be working with David? We need to investigate my own team, Daniel said, the words tasting bitter. I can't believe I'm saying this, but we can't trust anyone right now. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Raymond's team began discreet background checks on every executive who had access to sensitive information. The legal team started preparing lawsuits against David and Trevor. The PR team crafted a statement to address the fake acquisition story that was spreading through industry news sites. By early afternoon, Daniel's phone was ringing nonstop. Investors wanted explanations. The press wanted comments. Competitors were circling, sensing weakness. One of the company's biggest clients called to express concern about Vision Tech's stability. Daniel handled each call with as much calm as he could manage, but inside, he was falling apart. This wasn't just a business crisis. It was personal. David had been his best man at his wedding. They'd celebrated each other's kids being born. They'd cried together when the company almost went bankrupt in its early days and rejoiced when they landed their first major contract, and all of it had been a lie. Or at least at some point it had become one. Around 3 in the afternoon, Raymond found Daniel in his office, staring out the window at the city below. We found something, Raymond said quietly. About the second source. Daniel turned around, bracing himself for more bad news. One of your executives, Patricia, made a phone call to David about 20 minutes after your fake acquisition meeting ended. It lasted 4 minutes. Daniel felt his stomach drop. Patricia had been with the company for 7 years. She ran operations with efficiency and dedication. He'd never suspected her of anything. Are you sure? Daniel asked. Raymond showed him the phone records. The call happened. We also found financial transfers. David's been paying her $5,000 a month for the past year. Always in cash, documented in a ledger we found on Trevor's computer. Why would she do this? Daniel asked, more to himself than to Raymond. She makes a good salary. She has stock options. Why risk everything for $5,000 a month? I did some digging into her background, Raymond said. Her husband lost his job 8 months ago. They've got 3 kids in private school. Her mother is in an expensive nursing home. $5,000 a month probably felt like a lifeline. Daniel sat down heavily. He understood financial pressure. He'd been there himself in the early days. But to betray your company? Your colleagues? There had to have been another way. Bring her in, Daniel said. I want to talk to her. 20 minutes later, Patricia sat across from Daniel in his office. She looked nervous, which wasn't unusual given everything happening with David. But there was something else in her eyes. Guilt. "Patricia," Daniel began, keeping his voice gentle, "I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me." She nodded, clasping her hands tightly in her lap. "Have you been in contact with David since the board meeting this morning?" Patricia's face went pale. Yes, he called me. He was upset. I didn't think it would be wrong to answer. What did you talk about? He just wanted to know if I was okay, if I'd keep my job. He said he was sorry for putting everyone in this position." She paused. "Why, what's this about?" Daniel pulled out the phone records and the financial ledger. He laid them on the desk between them. Patricia looked at them and all the color drained from her face. "I think you know what this is about," Daniel said quietly. For a long moment, Patricia just stared at the documents. Then slowly tears began rolling down her cheeks. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, I'm so sorry." "Tell me everything," Daniel said. From the beginning, the story came out in broken sentences between sobs. Patricia's husband, Tom, had been laid off from his job as an engineer. They'd burned through their savings trying to maintain their lifestyle. The mortgage, the kids' school tuition, her mother's care facility. The bills were drowning them. David had approached her about a year ago. He said he was working on a side project and needed someone to keep him informed about certain company discussions. Nothing too serious, he'd said. Just competitive intelligence. He offered her $5,000 a month in cash. No questions asked. At first, Patricia had said no. But then Tom's unemployment benefits ran out. The credit card bills started piling up. The nursing home threatened to move her mother to a lower quality facility. Patricia felt desperate and alone, so she'd agreed. Just for a few months, she told herself. Just until Tom found work. But months turned into a year, and Tom was still unemployed. She'd gotten used to the extra money. It had become necessary. "I never thought I was really hurting anyone," Patricia said, wiping her eyes. David was already a partner. "I thought he had a right to know what was happening in the company. I didn't realize he was selling the information to competitors." "I swear I didn't know." "But you suspected," Daniel said. "You must have suspected something was wrong when he asked you to keep it secret." Patricia nodded miserably. "I didn't want to know. I just wanted to keep my head down and collect the money. I told myself I wasn't doing anything really bad. But I knew. Deep down I knew." Daniel felt a complicated mix of anger and pity. Patricia had made terrible choices, but he could see the desperation that had driven her to them. Unlike David, who'd been motivated by ego and greed, Patricia had been trying to keep her family afloat. "You understand I have to let you go," Daniel said. "I know," Patricia whispered. "I'll resign immediately." "I won't fight it. Please don't press charges. My kids, my mother, Tom, they need me. If I go to jail, they'll lose everything." Daniel was quiet for a moment. The lawyer in him knew she deserved prosecution. She'd committed corporate espionage, violated her employment contract, and helped damage the company. But the human in him saw a woman who'd made desperate choices in impossible circumstances. "I need to think about it," Daniel said finally. "Right now I need you to write down everything you told David over the past year. Every conversation, every piece of information, every meeting you reported on. All of it." Patricia nodded eagerly.